Good early evening, everybody. Hope you guys are doing good on this Tuesday. Let's talk about quarterbacks because a big part of the conversation for the Seahawks this offseason concerns the quarterback position, specifically regarding one Geno Smith. And with the opportunity to talk about Geno Smith comes an opportunity to talk about the quarterback position in general and how quarterbacks are getting paid. I saw an article from Joe Fan earlier. I think it was actually like a couple days ago. He posted it on Twitter, basically talking about the possibilities of what Geno Smith could get from the Seahawks or any team this offseason. And what he said, to paraphrase roughly, was on the one hand, if you look at how he played and you look at how other quarterbacks have gotten paid in the last few years, Geno Smith can easily argue for $35 to $40 million a year. And I've made some videos, and I'm going to make some more videos talking about this and talking about how, purely based off of the market and his play in 2022, yes, Geno Smith can get 35 to 40 million. However, the other side of that article that Joe Fan posted about was, are we due for a market correction at the quarterback position? Are we due for a little bit of a reset when it comes to how teams view quarterbacks and how they get paid? And the reason why this might be happening now is because if you really take a look at the highest paid quarterbacks in the league right now, a vast majority of them are being regretted by the teams that gave them those contracts. And not only that, there are really two elements here. Number one, the top paid quarterbacks in the league, almost all of them are letting their teams down in terms of the result of that extension. That's number one. Number two, and I'll go over this in this video as well, there's really not much of a middle class for quarterbacks right now. It's like either you get paid or you don't. And those two things make me wonder, is it about time that NFL teams wise up and realize, hey, this formula where you pay a good quarterback top money just because you're scared of losing that top quarterback is not the recipe for success. It's not how you win. You're not going to win championships paying a good quarterback elite money. And is this the offseason where every team wises up? Because it's going to take pretty much every team wising up for any actual change to occur in the market. Let's take a look at some of these highly paid per year quarterbacks on this list. So this is every currently active quarterback contract in the league sorted by average annual value. Let's just go through it. Aaron Rodgers, yeah, you think the Packers want a mulligan on that? He's dangling retirement over their head again. He didn't have a very good year. The team missed the playoffs. Like, I think they'd take a mulligan on that all day. Russell Wilson, my God, yes, he only became one of the three worst starting quarterbacks in the league in 2022. Denver would love to set this contract on fire and pretend like it never happened. Kyler Murray, no comment. You guys know. I don't need to explain that to you. Deshaun Watson, who knows, right? He did not play well this year. He did not. So, on the one hand, maybe he needs some time to get back into game shape. Maybe he'll get back to form next year. But as of right now, it looks like a disaster. You got to get down to these two guys right here to find two guys who are kind of living up to it. Pat Mahomes, I don't think the Chiefs are unhappy with their $45 million a year they're giving him, especially when you know this contract is kind of easily malleable and ultimately only had a tiny portion of it being guaranteed. Excuse me. So even this $45 million a year number is a little deceiving. Josh Allen, even though I'm a little worried about Josh Allen lately, I'm starting to wonder if maybe he was helped tremendously by Brian DeBole, who is now elsewhere. I'd still say the Bills are probably pretty happy with giving him his $43 million a year. And then you get to the two I would call like the presidents, the two, maybe you would call them like the patient zeros of what we're looking at here. This is the real problem with the quarterback market right now, okay? Derek Carr got an extension last offseason for more than $40 million a year. More than $40 million a year. 1 year later, the Raiders are already done with him. It's an open secret. They want him out. Now, the contract was set up so they can pretty easily get out of it without giving him a ton of money. But regardless, $40.5 million a year for what exactly? Let's go over here. Look at his previous 3 years prior to this extension. He was good. Over the course of 3 seasons, he played every game. He had a completion percentage of 68%, averaged 4,300 yards, 24 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. QB rating was 98. I mean, it's good, right? Barely a winning record. If you count the playoff game, he made one playoff game and lost it. He has a 500 record. Not even a winning record if you count the playoffs. 25-25 flat. So that's worth getting paid almost as much as a guy like Pat Mahomes, who won league MVP and Super Bowl MVP within his first few years in the league. Like, what? You look at that and you're like, wow, that really doesn't make sense. Because the thing to understand about these guys at the top, yes, their teams probably regret the contract, but mostly they at least did something in their past to justify it. Aaron Rodgers won back-to-back MVPs, and he's a former Super Bowl MVP. He's a 4-time MVP. Russell Wilson had 10 excellent years in Seattle. Now, that contract was definitely a bad idea because his play had clearly declined in the previous season, but at least you can look at Russell and go, okay, at some point in recent history, he had been good enough to justify $48.5 million a year. In 2020, he threw 40 touchdown passes. The year before, he was second in MVP. He clearly had done things in recent years to at least justify the contract on some level. Derek Carr had not been an MVP candidate since like 2016. So where did it come from? And then you have Dak Prescott. Now, obviously, it's easy to kick Dak right now because he played such an embarrassingly bad game against the Niners on Sunday night, and he's kind of becoming a phenomenal example of a terrible NFL contract right now. $40 million a year. By the way, if you take a look at the contract, there's really no way out of it. Dak is going to be there for the next 2 years. And by the way, he is due a ton of void dead money in the 2 years after his contract is actually up. So, terrible contract. And what did he do to earn that contract? Put up good numbers. 67% completion, about if per 17 games, almost 4,900 yards, 28 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, QB rating of about 98.5. Barely a winning record if you count the playoffs. I think he was like 21-18 across these 3 years. He had a devastating injury in the final year, by the way, and only played 5 games. That was an injury that, by the way, at this point may have actually derailed his career a little bit because he doesn't have the mobility that he used to have. Yeah. And you still gave him $40 million. Like, those two guys, I think, are kind of the primary example of what we're talking about here. They are good quarterbacks, and they get paid at a level that basically denotes them as being just barely a little bit below a guy like Mahomes and Josh Allen. So these are kind of the extreme examples, and I think both teams deeply regret these contracts. The Cowboys have had a good record since giving Dak this money, but that's had as much to do with the defense as the offense. In fact, I would say more to do with the defense. They have one playoff win, and in both their playoff losses, Dak has been bad. So I think the Cowboys would like a redo on this contract. Of course, the Raiders would love a redo because they're already done with Carr. They're basically acknowledging they're going to cut him. And the thing is, unlike somebody like Rodgers or Wilson, there was no reason to ever pay these guys this kind of money. You keep going down the list. You got Matt Stafford. Now, Stafford got rewarded for winning the Super Bowl more than anything. I don't know if his play justified $40 million a year, but he won the Super Bowl, so whatever. The Rams are going to give him a little more than he should, and both sides are going to feel okay with it. But yeah, you think the Rams don't wish they could take this one back right now when they know that Stafford's got this massive injury concern hanging over his head now and he's under contract for another 3 years? Kirk Cousins, I mean, it was just a 1-year deal, basically just kicking the can down the road for $35 million. Now, honestly, I think that Kirk Cousins' play over the last few years, in terms of at least just his stats, probably justifies $35 million a year in the current market. But Vikings, I mean, they're fine with this contract because it's so short term. He's going to be a free agent in 1 more year. But it's also not really a great thing to have $35 million committed to a decent quarterback, if that's what you believe that he is. Jared Goff and Carson Wentz, now there's a caveat here. These guys signed their extensions back in 2019. So back then, $35.5 or $32 million a year was considered like top of the line money. That was very close to the top of the market for a quarterback back in 2019. But also, these contracts at the time were understandable because Jared Goff had played in the Super Bowl. Carson Wentz had been the best quarterback in the league in 2017. So that made sense. But again, in both cases, even though it made some sense, and I get it, like this isn't like a Derek Carr or Dak Prescott situation, Jared Goff, the Rams had 2 more years with him, and then they paid a massive amount of draft pick capital to get Stafford for Goff. So they extended him for big money at the time, near top of the market money, played him for 2 more years, won 1 playoff game, didn't like where things were going, and paid a ton of draft capital to get Stafford in. Carson Wentz, same deal. He played 1 or 2 years on the extension, and Philly decided, we don't like where this is going, and they basically traded him and took on a massive dead cap hit just to not have to deal with him anymore. So both of these extensions you can probably say were regretted, although in Philly's defense, they recouped decent draft capital back for Carson Wentz. They still probably wish they hadn't done the extension because of the dead money they ended up having to eat because of that. Matt Ryan, again, this is another guy who probably deserved his extension because he won league MVP a couple years before. But since Matt Ryan signed this extension with Atlanta, Atlanta has not been to the playoffs. They traded him to the Colts, and now he looks completely washed up. So for $30 million a year, which was near top of the market in 2018, yeah, I think that the Falcons probably wish they had that one back when you look at the result. Again, justifiable at the time, but in the long run of things, regrettable. Ryan Tannehill, did Ryan Tannehill really play well enough in the previous couple years before 2020 to justify basically $30 million a year? I don't really think so, but even if you want to say, yeah, he did, because they made the AFC title game that one year, and he had shown so much promise in 2019, since Tannehill signed this contract, the Titans have not won a playoff game, and now it looks like the party's over. So while maybe the contract was at least somewhat justified, and it wasn't top of the market money for a quarterback at the time, it hasn't worked out. And here's the other interesting thing I want to go into in this video briefly here. Okay, you've got Matt Ryan making $30 million a year, and you've got Tannehill making just under $30 million a year. You don't have another quarterback on the average annual value list until Tom Brady at 15. So basically, there's one quarterback in the $15 to $30 million a year range, and he's barely in it. Literally $29.5 million. So honestly, in that mid area between 15 and 30, you basically don't have anybody right now. Then you've got Jameis Winston, who's making 14. I guess you could say he's part of the middle class of quarterbacks with Brady and Tannehill. And then you drop off to the guys who are like either they're whatever, like Mariota, like they're just stopgaps, they're just 1 year, like, hey, hold the fort down and we'll give you a little bit of money. Or guys on rookie deals, like Trevor Lawrence, like Joe Burrow, like Zach Wilson. So really, what I'm also noticing here is you can see there is just no middle class for quarterbacks. If you consider 30 to 35 million to be middle class, most of these contracts were signed years ago when 30 to 35 million was pretty close to top of the market. So basically, this is kind of what I'm saying. As a quarterback, either you get paid monster money, like 35 mil a year plus, or you don't get much of anything. Again, Brady's kind of an extreme example because Brady doesn't really care how much money he gets. He just wants what's there because he's got so much money anyway. It doesn't really matter to him. He just wants to keep playing more than anything. So even the Brady example, I feel like you can kind of throw out. So the middle class quarterbacks in the league right now who are getting paid good money but not top money, it's like Jameis Winston and nobody else. Everybody else is either in the group or they're not in the group. And maybe this is what needs to change. And maybe this is the offseason where teams start looking at this and they go, you know, other than the Kansas City Chiefs and probably the Buffalo Bills and maybe you could say you can't even really say the Vikings, right? You can't even really say the Vikings, but maybe the Vikings. All these teams are regretting these contracts. So maybe that's going to save us a little bit when it comes to Geno Smith. Look, I'll say it, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Geno Smith, based off his play and based off what other quarterbacks get paid in the NFL right now, is worth $35 to $40 million. But maybe this is the offseason where GMs go, just because my colleagues jumped off a bridge doesn't mean I'm going to. We have all these examples of teams handing out these big contracts to not quite big-time quarterbacks and regretting it pretty severely. Again, if you look at the current list of contracts here, you can find very few that the teams are probably okay with right now. Mahomes, Josh Allen, I guess Kirk Cousins, and that's kind of it. Everyone else is like on a rookie deal. All the other quarterbacks that are probably in the good graces of their teams right now are on rookie deals or tiny deals. And then you have something like this. The final four NFL quarterbacks in 2022. You've got Mahomes making the big money. He's one of the examples of a guy who got paid big money and lived up to it. Joe Burrow on a rookie deal of $9 million. Jalen Hurts, $1.5 million. A guy who I did not believe in at all when he came into the league. Didn't even go in the first round, and look where he is now. And of course, maybe the most extreme example we've seen in a while, Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, making less than $1 million. He's got his team in the NFC title game. So what if every team in the league just decides, you know what, to the Geno Smiths, to the Lamar Jacksons, to the Derek Carr is probably going to become free this offseason, so Derek Carr, to all these guys out there who are good, we're just not going to give you great money. We're going to redefine a tier of quarterback pay in this league for guys who are good. And it's going to be, look, Herbert's probably going to get like 55 to 60 million a year. I believe that because he's good. Because he's established himself at such a high ability, high level of play. I think you're going to see Joe Burrow get pretty close to that as well. Probably Jalen Hurts will probably get that money as well because those guys have played at MVP caliber levels. But a guy like a Lamar Jackson, whose MVP days are distant in the rearview mirror, a guy like Geno, who's had one good year, a guy like I said, Derek Carr, who's now going to shake free and is still pretty good, but he's nowhere near great. Maybe we're going to redefine a new area of the quarterback tiers for those guys, where it's like, okay, 20, 25, maybe like 28 tops. And we're going to basically change the way we're doing things. It's going to take every team pretty much involved to make this happen. But do you think it's going to happen this offseason? Do you believe that the teams can wise up? Let me know what you think. See you later.